Thanks for joining us on today's Fast Performance Podcast. The Fast Performance Podcast is brought to you by Kaiser. Kaiser, powering human performance. On today's episode, we sit down with Nick Winkleman, who is the head of performance and science with the Irish Rugby Football Union. We talk coaching, cueing, and Nick's new just-released book, The Language of Coaching. Be sure to listen as we offer a special discount code to our listeners just for tuning in. Thanks so much for joining us. We hope you enjoy today's session.
Monsters, can you get them over there? Yeah, baby, I love it.
Did you get it? Did you get it? I hope you're recording because
I literally just hit
that
the
is
record
movie.
button.
That is movie magic. That is movie magic right there.
Yeah,
Sam,
for those
it's
of
like
you that
I
are,
dream of. It's like I dream of Genie. Just have it suddenly be right there.
it is. So for those of you that are just tuning into the Fast Performance Podcast today, you just got a glimpse of our mutual friend and fellow professional Nick Winkleman, and his favorite beverage, which hasn't changed since I knew you as an intern at Athletes Performance. But we're going to do a little introduction and bio on Nick. He's the head of athletic performance and science for the Irish Rugby Union. His primary role is to oversee the delivery and development of strength and conditioning and sports science across all national, men's and women's and provincial teams. Before working for Irish Rugby, Nick was the Director of Education and Training Systems for Exos, which is formerly Athletes Performance, located in Phoenix, Arizona. As a Director of Education, Nick oversaw the development and execution of all internal and external educational initiatives. And as a performance coach, he oversaw the speed and assessment program for the Exos NFL Combine Development Program. And many of the athletes that were supported across the NFL, MLB, NBA, national sports organizations, and the military. He has completed his PhD through Rocky Mountain University of Health Professions with a dissertation and focus on motor skill learning and sprinting. He's a recognized speaker on human performance and coaching science and has numerous book chapters, which is what we're going to talk about today, and peer-reviewed papers focusing on the intersection between coaching, language, and athlete learning. So here we go, ladies and gentlemen. Please say hi to our friend Nick Winkleman from the Irish Rugby Union. How are you this morning?
Oh, I'm tired after you read that description. I mean, that's what I am. I'm very tired, apparently, from doing all that stuff. And I must get you the short one next time.
Yeah, I think that would work too. I'm kind of tired.
I get that all the time. People ask me, like, hey, what? Like, we were just speaking about Mark, and he's like, hey, what do you want me to say? I go, I don't really care. You just give him like 2 or 3 things. That's good enough. That just mean all it means, Nick, is we're getting old. That's what it boils down to.
Exactly. Just call me coach, and we can go from there.
Well, we were just discussing whether we need to call you doctor, which I don't. Based on our history together, Nick, I just don't know whether I can bring myself to do that right now.
Well, for that reason alone, you should. You should. Respect your academic elders. No,
I'm with you
I always tell everyone I got the PhD from my mother. She calls me doctor. She likes to see the videos when I'm at a conference, and I get all itchy when they introduce me as Dr. Winkleman. And it's funny enough, in the little mini course I just put up the other day, I said, "Don't call me doctor, call me coach." At the end of the day, that was for the mother, and so she's happy. She's proud.
Nice. Yeah, well, that's good.
As well as should be.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about this book. I mean, for those of you that are just tuning in, how long have we known each other? What, 20 years or something like that? I mean, it's been an awful long time.
Yeah, I think as long as I've been doing S&C, I've known you.
But Nick has long been what I personally refer to as sort of the king of the cue. He has done so much white paper research and spent so much time actually digging into the method of language that we use for coaching our athletes. And by far, it's been a complete game changer, especially the way I personally have trained our Olympic winter sport athletes. Utilizing his techniques have just been unbelievable. So let's kick this thing off by talking about the book, Nick, the language of coaching, which is it's already started to ship from what I understand. And basically, this is a culmination of little projects and things that you've been working on for quite some time.
Yeah, no, 100%. I mean, it's 15 years old. I mean, when people say, how long have you been preparing to write this or think about this, I mean, the writing took 4 years, give or take, but the thinking took 15 years. And I mean, you both know me fairly well. I wasn't about to go pen to paper on something until I felt that I had vetted it intellectually and academically, but then lived it practically and seen the results and seen the failures and found the nuance. Because at the end of the day, if you just give the canned response of, oh, here's how you coach, you're going to be wrong as often as you are right. And so trying to capture nuance around coaching and coaching language, but also simplify it into models a new coach can use, let alone someone who's been doing it for 20 plus years, was kind of the challenge. So just to go back to the beginning, I mean, basically early on, we all have different exposures from a up and coming perspective. And it just so happened I had a number of them where I had coaches, personal trainers, physios, like all different domains of the movement profession who were just ridiculously good communicators. Like I would watch their clients' eyes just bulge as they would pause and just eloquently deliver this very simple phrase. And then all of a sudden the movement just seemed to unlock itself. And I could remember having similar light bulb moments as an athlete and causing them altogether less frequently when I was an up and coming coach. And those ideas hit me when I was 19. And I'll never forget, JC, you know him, Guido van Rijsselgem was a mentor of mine.
Oh, yeah.
And I told him, I was 19, I said, I don't know why, but I just know one day I'm going to write a book called The Form Within. And it was going to be a book about cueing. I kid you not. That's the first time I got the idea. I parked that idea, though, until 2009 when I took over the NFL Combine Development Program. And now I'm coaching the elite of the elite from an American football perspective who have to stop being football players for 8 weeks to prepare to run as fast as they can just so they can look good at the NFL Combine, answer the interview questions, so to speak, and get on with the draft. Mm-hmm. And so that environment quickly showed me that they're already at the top of their game. I wasn't going to be able to make a lot of hard and fast physical changes in 8 weeks. I mean, don't get me wrong, we did, but the key was optimization. These guys came in with spades and spades of assets. It wasn't like they lacked physical ability, but they didn't know how to put it together to optimize jumping, sprinting, and agility when that's all they were being assessed on. And so I quickly realized after year one, the failure wasn't the program. It was the person. It was me. And I said, I have to look at myself as a variable. So as a variable, well, what kind of variable am I? How do I influence learning and movement more than anything else? And I realized it was my voice. It was what I said. I was talking to these guys from the beginning to the end. I was coaching the dotted I's, the crossed T's, sweating details, and making them sweat the details in the process. And I quickly realized that was it. I was overcoaching, and I was overcoaching the wrong things. And if something good was in there, it was overshadowed by the things that shouldn't have been, and just the mere mountain of information. And so I went to work studying, digging, applying academically and practically, and the language of coaching was born 15 years later. So what is the book about? Very simply, it's about the phrases you use, the cues you use to teach movement, full stop. And specifically, it doesn't get into how to give a rousing motivational speech. It doesn't tell you how to deal with different personality profiles or how to give someone information if they're getting cut. It doesn't get into that, albeit I think a lot of the principles parlay and could be applied in those scenarios. The book is 1 inch wide and 100 miles deep. It specifically gets into the last thing you say before someone moves, the ideas we give athletes to help them move better. How do we optimize those ideas to not only get better movers, but optimize those ideas and in the process, build better relationships, which is actually the secret power of effective cueing. And the book fundamentally gives you the blueprint to build the fishing pole so you can fend for yourself, but it also gives you the fish, because I don't want you to starve in the process of learning this behavior, this skill we call coaching language.
Gotcha. Wow, that's awesome.
Yeah, 100%. I think, as you said, the length of time that you've put into this whole process, right? I go back to thinking about, like, for us in the the practitioner's course that we teach in conjunction with the NSCA for the tactical strength and conditioning, and a lot of that is, getting folks that are maybe lower on the totem pole educationally, as far as, that's not a dig on them, but we get a lot of folks that are coming in as service people that are being tasked with coaching, and they have none. They have no coaching chops at all, and a commanding officer says, hey, you're in charge of this brigade, battalion, whatever. And so we get into a conversation inevitably every time in that, and we talk about this subject matter, and without question, I always will refer back to so much of the stuff that you've brought to light with regards to all this, and really, kind of send people in that direction. I say, hey, if you want more information about this, if you want to look up how much impact there is in how you say and what you say as far as a coach, I really refer to a lot of the work that you've done, and it's been a long process to really fine-tune that into something now that you've really I think honed in as such an integral part of what our craft is as a coach, right? And so it's awesome to see it now. I'm excited to get my hands on the new book, and it's pretty cool to see how much depth there really is, because I don't think anybody's put that much critical thought into this specifically as you have.
Hey, Nick, are you still there?
Yeah, I am here.
Okay, you're just a little frozen.
So, I mean, one of the things I know, Nick, getting back to the sort of the genesis of the book, and how all this stuff started.
Sorry, hang on, time out.
So, Nick, let's talk a little bit about the genesis of this. I recall sort of a meeting where we got at least a bottle or two of wine deep in Las Vegas at NatCon years ago. It was you, me, and Guido, I think, when we had this three-headed monster plan to take over the world. But one of the things that you had discussed a lot about at that time was the work of Gabrielle Wolf. And
Yes.
And maybe you can sort of allude to how that piqued your interest and got you at least moving in that direction, regardless of the fact if you had to put the project on pause for combine stuff or whatever else. But what is it that sort of planted that seed, and how did her work feed into that?
Yeah. So I think, as I alluded to, the seed originally was planted from this guy, JC, funny enough, was his name as well. Maybe it was you in disguise. You've been manufacturing my career all along. But JC was working under Guido with me. And this guy he was the original king of Qs. And he didn't even know it. But he was so intense with what he said. And he was so precise with what he said. There was no question that what came out of his mouth was what that person was focusing on. And it was just kind of the precision with which he did it that I'd say really planted the seed. So credit where credit is due. And I was presenting in 2008, I believe it was. I was doing my very first Perform Better lecture. And on Fridays, I think it is, they do a Q&A. And one of the questions was, if you were to come back here next year, what would your topic be? Which I actually loved that question, because so many people present on the same thing every year.
Yeah.
I think Chris Poyer has possibly stopped the question because I haven't heard it since. But everybody answered it. And I said, if I'm invited back, I will present on the impact of coaching cues and communication on learning to move. And I'll never forget, just struck up a conversation with a couple individuals. And I started digging into the research. And funny enough, Brett Bartholomew at the time was an intern. He had done some work under Jared Porter, who's big in the kind of cueing, attentional focus space. But anyway, I come to find this gal, Gabrielle Wolf. And I dig into it. And inevitably, one of the first papers you find from her is this 1998 paper. And I think it's an interesting story to share. It just shows where this came from. And that is, she was finishing her PhD. She was living in Germany. And she went on a holiday. I believe it was in Lake Garda in Italy. And she's looking to windsurf. So she buys this magazine on windsurfing. And this is her kind of telling the story in her own book called Attention and Motor Skill Learning.
Which is a great book, by the way.
It's a phenomenal book. It's a textbook, but it doesn't read like one.
Yeah.
So she's trying to go through all these techniques to basically do this jibe move, which is where you're going from one direction, I believe. You quickly move the sail in a certain way, move your body in a certain way, and you catch the wind, you go the other way. And so it's a tough move. And so she's trying to learn this dang thing. And she keeps falling off the board. And inevitably, just she realizes that if she can focus on what the board is doing and the movement of the board, that was the key to kind of allow the whole movement to come together. And so in that moment, she, being a motor learning theorist, said, hold on. I wonder if there's a difference between learning by focusing on moving the body versus focusing on the environment I'm moving in, i.e., the hips would be the body, but the board would be the environment. So which would be better to think about? And so she goes to the lab and picks a balance study, but she picks kind of a cool one. Funny enough, JC, it's a skiing simulator, and it's on the old school kind of dual platform one with the big bungees, and you're trying to move to the left and the right. And they define success as, if you could go farther left and right, and you could do it faster, meaning you can get more reps in a given time period, that you were more successful at that skill. And they came up with 2 groups and 2 cues. One group was told to push through the outer edge of their foot, and the other group was told to push through the outer edge of the wheels, which were kind of like, if you would, the outer edge of the ski or the snowboard. And so they put these cohorts through, and they have their measurement, and they find that when they're delivering the cues, those that are getting the external one, the one on the wheels versus the foot, they're performing better. They seem to be learning the movement quicker. But the reality is you can't assess learning until you remove the thing that you used to teach. So they bring them back a day later, and they give them no cues at all. They say, okay, off you go. Let's see what you've retained, because that, by definition, is learning. You own it now. And sure enough, the group that had been focusing externally on the wheels outperformed with an uptick in performance the group that had focused on their feet. So external and internal. So they go to publish this paper, and it's rejected. And it's rejected on the simple grounds that the reviewers could not believe that something so trivial, minute as edge of foot and wheel could manufacture a difference. So they're told to replicate their findings in a different movement, and they'll republish. So they go back in and they go to a normal just balance machine. They call it a stabilometer, a fixed axis. And so again, they use very similar cues. One group is told to keep their feet parallel on the board. And in another group, they just put little pieces of sticky tape in front of the feet, and they're told to keep the tape parallel. Now, what's interesting in this study is there was no difference in training, meaning the trajectory of improvement in balance was the same between the internal and the external group. And this will become relevant maybe later on in the talk, because some people will use that as evidence of internal cues being as good, at least, as external.
Right.
But hold on, there we're not assessing learning. Let's see when they come back how they move. And so they bring them back, whatever it is, a day or so later, and no cues at all, off you go. And once again, we see that separation. All of a sudden, it seems in the data, literally in the data, that those who had focused on those little pieces of tape, the external cue, outperformed the internal. They go on to later replicate that study and actually show that when you tried to balance by keeping the pieces of tape parallel, whether you were looking at them in a virtual sense on a screen, imagining them on the board, didn't matter, versus your feet, your reaction time is faster. So they showed that if you actually focus on trying to keep your feet, not only is your balance worse, but it seems it takes more cognitive real estate, making your reaction time slower.
Right.
And so this was the first study in 98. And now we fast forward to today in 2020, there's at least in terms of this internal-external comparison, there's at least 160 to 170 papers that have covered this stuff. And so Gabrielle Wolf is a legend, and very much so is the academic fuel that underpins the language of coaching. And she gets thousands and thousands of words of credit, storytelling, and referencing, as she should.
Yeah, no, I remember we had dinner with her one night when she was I think at the Arizona conference, and I remember that, and I was like, oh my God, I mean, I could sit here and listen to her ramble on for hours. I mean, it was incrable.
Yeah, I mean,
she's an amazing debater as well.
Yeah,
She dismantles people.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I had not heard of her until it was from, you starting to kind of bring her into, the conversation, and obviously, as you said, as much as it should be very well known, what she's done and the information and really trailblazing the road to where, you see this now. And I think it's hard to go through any coaching kind of, track, if you will, now, because we are more aware of it. I think we're so much more aware that, it's not just putting together a program and throwing it into a room. I can recall, and I use this, and I probably stole it from you, Nick, the concept of taking 10 people and putting them in a room and giving them all the same program and saying, all right, well, then should they all get the same result? Right. And I think I recall a slide that you had done one time, and, I'm sitting as a bystander watching that and going, that's the proof in the pudding right there, that it's not just about walking in the room and handing them a program. It's so much more. And I know Mark, Verstegen talks the same language, and we talked about that yesterday, which was, why do you give away this information and all that stuff? And it says, well, there is so much more interdependent relationship that is based on the fact that the person that is impacting how the program is being, implemented, and the things that are being said is going to yield the outcome, and not vice versa, not in the opposite, right?
Well, Mark Taysom, who I was on with yesterday, he's dating back some of his early work as an S&C coach, well before Gabrielle Wolf's study and well before he came into contact with any of my, let's call it, synthesis of her and others' work. And he would say he knew long ago that if he could get his language right and simplified, that was the key separator. He worked in the military, so he'd have 100 guys at a shot. At a period of time, he felt that he was probably coaching more people per day than any other strength and conditioning coach. And he knew early on that if he could get his language planned, clearly outlined, especially when they're in a group context, he had far better results with the individuals. He even argued, and this was his words, not mine, he asked me the question, would you take a less than ideal program with ideal coaching over an ideal program with less than ideal coaching? I say full stop, 100%.
Yeah.
100%.
Yeah.
The coaching, I have a post I'm going to put up later, I think today or tomorrow. It's like the coach's job is to get the information off the page and into the person.
Right.
So just because it's on the page, people, it doesn't mean it gets into that person.
Yeah.
That's why you have a job. You are the bridge, which is why it baffles my mind that the kind of book I've written, it isn't more prominent and hasn't possibly already been written.
Right.
Yeah, that's very true.
And it's interesting you use the term separator. Joel and I have been using that term a lot lately. And what I'm starting to notice, and maybe this is just my own interpretation of where high level performance training is going these days, but I'm seeing a lot of similarity in programming. I'm seeing a lot of similarity in exercise selection. I'm starting to see a little bit of a plateau of the innovative ideas, which I think to a certain extent from the movement skills standpoint and from the visual standpoint, yeah, of course, at some point we're going to really work back to basics on push, pull, squat, reach, so on and so forth. But the delivery of it, and to your point, Nick, that's one of the things that's always fascinated me by watching you work and watching you work with athletes is the method in which you change your delivery. I've always said, the best coaches are ones that can deliver the same information in 6 different languages because you have so many different learners. You have so many different learning styles. Some are visual, some are auditory. Some just simply do not understand the concept. So one of the things I think that you've used the term a lot, Nick, which is check for learning, right? You use that in the XPS certification. You use that a lot for, when you're talking to mentees and other coaches and things like that, is always checking for learning. And now I catch myself saying, do you understand what I'm saying? Would it make more sense if I said it to you in a different way? So on and so forth. And so I think the check for learning piece is now becoming, in my mind, the most prominent separator between a good coach and a great coach.
A couple things. I couldn't agree more. And when people say, how did you inevitably figure this out? I say, I paid attention.
Right.
That's it.
Right.
Yeah.
Like literally, I paid attention to the person rather than the program. Now, people will take that and literally quote it. Oh, Nick doesn't think about the program. No, of course I'm not saying I don't think about the program. But once the program is written, I had to be intentional in watching, one, yes, their response to just the physical stuff we were doing. Was it too much, not enough? Did they enjoy it? That's all part and parcel. But the thing that I really started to pay attention to deliberately was when I cued, what the heck was happening? Because for so many years, I would be happy with what I heard coming out of my voice, not what I saw with my eyes. Like, you feel me on that?
Yeah,
like,
absolutely.
I was just happy with what I said.
Oh, sure.
Not with what I saw. I mean, and gosh, for so many years, I'm like, man, that sounded good. I'm patting myself on the back. And, now if I go back and look at that guy was given 5 cues, rapid fire, to 10 athletes, all at different stages of learning, different learning preferences. And yeah, I was, at best, I wasn't making any difference. And at worst, I was actually hindering them. So that's my, let's call it soapbox speech on what you said there. But I want to zoom in just so we can give some people some strategies here on how to do what you're saying. And I think there are what you might call sandwich strategies. And so things you can do before they move and after they move to check for and guide learning. Mm-hmm. So here's the first one. Let's say I've been using the bench press on a lot of podcasts. I'm gonna stick with it because it's a simple one. Everyone does it on Mondays. So let's just go ahead and get everyone better on that Monday. So here we go. We're doing a bench press and I give a cue. I want you to drive the bar to the ceiling. And I say to the athlete, after I've explained the cue, what does that mean to you? Or I could say, what are you going to focus on? And it's interesting. You'd think that they would repeat you back verbatim. But I think both of you probably know that that's not always what happens.
Right.
And so I might say, drive the bar to the ceiling. But they might say back to me, what did I say to you? You want me to push the bar to the ceiling? I say, okay. So in my mind now, as a conscious, listener, an active listener, I'm going to say they use the word push instead of drive. And so all I'm going to do is I'm going to mirror back to them and upgrade my language. Yes, exactly. Push the bar to and through the ceiling. Let's go. So that's one way to check for understanding on the cue. Equally, I could demonstrate the movement. I say, listen, we need to get that bar off your body and towards the ceiling a lot faster. What do you think you can focus on to achieve that? So now we're involving them. And guess what? They're going to serve me up their understanding on a platter because by the very fact that the words they're going to speak, I know that those words are familiar to them. Mm-hmm. And so I'm listening for the phrase. I'm listening for the verb. I'm just listening for the energy of it. And I'll be honest with you. I wouldn't probably ask an athlete that day one because we're just starting to build rapport.
Right.
They need to have confidence in me as a coach. But if I've been working with you for a while, absolutely, I'm going to give you the respect of asking you that question. And so they might say, well, a lot of them actually come up with analogies. I'm going to imagine someone's on me like I'm in the bottom of, having just been tackled, and I need to get them off me.
Right.
I don't like small spaces, coach. I'm getting them off me. Beautiful. Get them off you. Now becomes the cue, right? So there's different levels we can do on the front end of, let's call it cue comprehension. I like that, cue comprehension. Now on the back end, we've watched that movement take form. And a simple question might be, what did you focus on during that repetition? I love that question because many times we're like, nothing. And maybe the rep went well, maybe it didn't go well, nothing. But for me, if you don't focus on something, you can be distracted by anything. And people oftentimes confuse focus with cognition. Just because you're focusing doesn't mean you're thinking, doesn't mean you're going through the order of operations on how to be technical. No, you're just focusing on something with precision and purpose. And so many athletes focus on nothing. I'm like, well, listen, we got to put one idea in your mind to guide that movement, to guide how it feels. And that inevitably circle back upgrades the movement, and now they can see that for themselves. Mm-hmm. So these are some of the various processes I go through to look for cue comprehension, but also to connect the cue back to the movement and make sure I'm paying attention so that when I am asking those questions, whether they're A, B, direct, or open, that I can actually have a representative conversation with that player.
No, that's awesome. That's.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm kind of left speechless at that point. I mean.
Yeah, I'll just keep listening.
Yeah.
Well, but what do you guys do? I mean, what do you guys do? You both have said, the same way I stumbled on this, you
Right.
guys stumbled on this.
Yeah.
How is your coaching evolved, so to speak, since bringing some of these ideas into your practice?
I can tell you right away, that's an easy one for me because I alluded to the Gabrielle Wolf thing, which obviously spoke to me because it was a ski simulator, right?
Yes, of
So
course.
for me, it was stupidly easy to take that information and recycle it into the work that I was doing with Patrick Yarbin and Chris Del Bosco and Lindsey Vaughn and even Michaela later on about, being able to, move the ground away from you, extend towards the ceiling, extend towards the sky, extend towards the woods, whatever it may be. And I distinctly remember, tackling those things prior to even bringing you in, Nick, to talk to our coaching staff at Ski and Snowboard Club Vail. And that was a freakish game changer for the guys that were on the hill to listen to you talk about that type of external versus internal cueing. This was, you may have had the concept of the book in your head at that time, but still the stuff that you were talking about at that time was somewhat groundbreaking to sport-specific coaching. So in other words, like I was able to grasp, and I don't want to speak for you, but I'm sure you can say this as well, Joel, that this concept of internal versus external is going to be a game changer within the industry from a strength and conditioning standpoint. Now, the next part and parcel of that thing, and I think this is where I'd like people that are listening to understand, this book goes far beyond the coaching of strength and conditioning. This book has applications into every single sport culture and how we coach those individual sports, not just in the gym, not just on the track, but on the field, on the hill, in gameplay, in everything else that's associated with it, how you communicate to those individual athletes and then to the group of athletes as a team, and to understand how to change that language on the fly if perhaps they're not getting the concept or they're losing confidence, or let's say they're in a game and it's halftime and they're down by 10 points or whatever it is, and they need to understand. And like you said, it's not a motivational thing. This isn't, you're not going to get these world championship John Wooden let's go party around the campfire speeches in here. This is about how you deliver the content, i.e. how you actually coach them up on the nuts and bolts and the information that you're trying to deliver to them. And sometimes the way that delivery takes place is you have to be pliable. And I use the term pliable enough to say, sure, I'm going to change this language right now because obviously this group or this individual is, I can see the 17-year-old glazed over look in their eyes. They're, they're just like, oh boy, okay. So I know that they're off on the Serengeti somewhere, and I got to go grab a rope and haul them back in so that they understand what we're talking about.
Yeah, the way that I look at it is I think there's a lot of light bulb moments that I kind of, you take a step back from it, and I look at my evolution as a coach, my influences, my mentors, and things like that. And I think back to my early years as a coach when I knew less than nothing, and I know just barely a tick above that now as I realize how much I don't know. But I look at Mike Sanders, who's a longtime mentor of mine, and Mike was a king of analogies.
Right.
And I would sit back, and as I was an intern and a young coach, and I would watch how he would coach kids and the things that he would use to connect information to execution, right? Mm-hmm. And I think that to me, beautiful. that was the, as this became more kind of brought into a spectrum of realization, that was a light bulb moment for me where I went, aha, like it makes more sense to me now. And now I look at it and realize that it's really all of this conceptually to me is an evolution of communication as a medium to achieve a goal.
Agreed.
Right. And within that, there are, micro pieces within that. There are macro pieces within that. And ultimately, it is your job, as you said, to be able to learn and evolve as a coach, and the relational piece between where that medium or where that barrier is to grow. And we always talk about this on the cueing side of things, is like I'm trying to fill up this massive cauldron of ammunition for me to be able to utilize different forms of it. There's a story that I think about that goes back to the early days of who the former, it was Boise State head coach, then came to CU. What's his name? I'm totally drawing a blank. Football coach.
Okay.
And he told a story at a conference one time where he was a defensive coordinator. And he's at practice. I think it was a Pac-10 school when he was a younger coach, and he's coaching this drill and he's going through it, and he's got a player that's just not getting it, not understanding. And as well as I do, guys, like how many times have you seen a coach who then gets mad?
Dan Hawkins?
Dan Hawkins, yes, thank you.
Yeah.
And Dan tells this great story. He says, I remember being a young coach, and I'm telling these defensive linemen in this drill, do it this way, and they're not getting it, and they're not getting it, and he starts getting mad, and he starts just dog cussing this player because he's like, how do you not understand this? I've told you this 5-6 times now or whatever. And the head coach walks over and sees this kind of going down, because it's becoming a fiasco. Of course, you're just banging your head against the wall, and the coach comes over and says, I've told him to do it 5 or 6 times. He's not understanding it, doesn't get it, right? And coach turns and looks at me and says, maybe say it differently.
What a shock.
Right. And it's like, he goes, and it was a realization for him as a young coach, like, I can't just keep asking them, because it makes sense. I joke about it and say this all the time. I'll say, it always makes sense in my head.
Oh, of course.
Right. And I think a lot of times as coaches, we fall into that pitfall, which is, I get it. Why don't you get it?
Yeah.
You don't see it the way I see it?
Yeah.
Right.
So a couple things there. One, we have to always recognize that we communicate from a selfish point of view.
Yeah.
Right.
The stuff that comes out of our mouth wouldn't come out of our mouth if it didn't make sense to us, at point zero. So the reality is we have to be able to check for learning. We have to be chameleons in our communication. Or as Dan Coyle once said to me, the author of The Talent Code, we need to be communication athletes.
Right.
And, that means we have to disconnect our own selfish, and I don't mean that to sound negative, but our natural self-oriented beliefs with language, and seek to understand others. And just a footnote to that is, in the past, we've been collectors of cues, and we collect cues as we collect cards. We hear them from other coaches. We hear them around the proverbial campfire. We recall them from when we were athletes. And because they worked for us, again, there's that selfish vantage point, it works really, really well. And for too long, what you've described there is our approach to cueing is, when it doesn't work, we say it more often and say it louder. So what I've
Say the
tried
same
to
thing,
do
but
here,
louder.
exactly. What I've tried to do here, and it's a word floating around, but one that I love, is be a collector of cues. Like, there's unbelievable cues to collect, but also be a craftsman or a craftsperson of cues.
Right.
And that I can store a lot more flour, water, yeast, and egg than I can loaves of bread. So let me get my ingredients on point, and I can cook you up a sweet cue anytime you need it.
Yeah.
That's a great analogy. I really like that one. Yeah.
Well, and I think that the other part is, I always think about that. The first thing that came into my mind is, like, inflection is a good one, right? Which is,
for sure.
We utilize that. Like, I'll do a drill all the time where we will, do something simple. We're doing base level things, trying to understand, like, power line position and things like that, and something as simple as a wall drill. And I'll have a group of athletes or whatever, and I'll say, all right, switch, switch, and then you add inflection to that, and then bring that to their attention, right?
Yeah.
Like, what was the difference between that? And all of a sudden the execution changes based on inflection. And it's not yelling, we just kind of mentioned, like, getting louder, but it's the utilization of your voice in a more effective manner, as opposed to, yes, I said the same thing, but the way that I said it was different, right? And I think those are the nuances and the things that, like you've said, just changes everything.
Yeah.
But this is the thing before JC jumps in there. You've nailed it. If I have an opportunity, my wife's already going to be killing me for saying this, but if I have an opportunity to go second edition on this book, I will dedicate an entire chapter to nonverbal. And by nonverbal, I mean non-spoken word, which is going to be tone of voice and body language. Because when we think about it, when our tone of voice, our words, and our body language match and are appropriate for the context we find ourselves in, that's the genesis of understanding. I believe that fully. And so I just cover off the words, even though tone and inflection, those pieces are footnotes throughout the book. But they deserve their own chapters, their own real estate,
right?
Because they're critical. And for listeners who want, like, because that's a fairly, talk about, if communication is a soft skill, then inflection and body language, I mean, that's just like jello. That is hard to grasp. And so who does it better than anyone, and who I'm starting to lightly interact and, dare I say, collaborate with, is someone called Julian Treasure. He has 5 TED Talks, of which one of them is on communication. He has a wonderful book on, communicating to be understood. And he talks about, he's from a musical background, and he shifted into communication. So he gives you the toolbox, the vocal toolbox, and just starts to make accessible the different ways we can say the same thing to impart different meaning. And I think it's beautiful. And Joel, I'm glad you bring it up, because I think it's something we intuitively fall upon if our coaching expertise increases, because that feedback from an athlete, when we get the inflection and the words right, is going to echo, hey, I should do more of this. But for those that have never thought about it, great resource, Julian Treasure.
Awesome. That's outstanding. Yeah, that's great. Well, so for our listeners, we're obviously discussing Nick's book here, which has just been released. It's called The Language of Coaching. It is the #1 new release in sports coaching on Amazon. Don't know if you knew that or not, but needless to say, that's pretty good given how much money Jeff Bezos is making right now. But
Well, I'm glad I have all these copies of Kindle books on my desktop, so at least I bought enough to get it up there.
That's awesome. But you do have a website as well, Nick, that's associated with the book. Tell us about that.
Yeah, it's this is new new territory for me. So The Language of Coaching, so same as the title of the book.com. And at this point, there's no paywall or anything. I just want it to start to become a hub to unify the conversation around coaching, communication, and related topics. So what's cool is when people subscribe to it, I designed a 2-hour mini course, which is the most up-to-date course I have, that kind of echoes call it the Cliff Notes version principles of the book, as well as I'm keeping all my Instagram quotes and whatnot that have little tidbit advice. They're all in there. The slides are in there. The cool thing I'm going to now do, and I did the first one this month, is these live Q&As, and call it a podcast in training. So like next month, it's going to be Alan Cosgrove and I, who's already read the book. Yeah. We're going to be discussing like this coaching. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a book club where after the book is out for about a month or so, I'm going to run these live Q&As that go book chapter by book chapter, all free. There's no cost here. You just need to subscribe to the website. That's it, thelanguageofcoaching.com.
It's awesome. Incredible.
Yeah.
So to kind of neatly put a bow on this, we finish our podcast and webcast by doing this thing, the Fast Five. I'm going to turn it over to my partner in crime here, Joel, who's going to hit you up with what we refer to as the clean F words.
Okay. Fantastic. I'm ready to go.
All right. So you've been in Ireland for a little while now. How long has it been now?
It was 4 years in March.
Wow.
I can't believe it.
Wow.
Yeah. So you've had plenty of time to experience plenty over there. So we're gonna ping you a little bit on some of these things. So the first one obviously is going to be food. What's the best and worst food? Or preferences, what would you say are your best and worst choices that you've come to either love or hate in Ireland?
Okay, the best, so in America we have chicken strips, and just by the nature of it, it doesn't sound very appealing.
Right.
But here they call them goujons. And I tell you what, I don't know if it's the breading, I don't know if it's the chicken, I don't know if it's the chips, which for my American listeners are fries. They absolutely kill it. Okay, so the goujons. You thought I was gonna say fish and chips.
Yeah.
I wouldn't do that to my Irish countrymen because this isn't the country that comes from.
We're
going with the goujons. Okay.
All right.
And the worst, They have, I think in America, I think in the US we call it arugula. Here they call it rocket, which I think in the US we use it as a garnish.
Right.
Here it's the meat of the salad, and it absolutely burns your mouth. It is the most bitter tasting thing. It's on everything. So there you go. Blue John's for sale, which is probably why the scale keeps going up since I've lived here. So
I like it. So we'll move on to fun. What are things that you've learned over there? Obviously different culture, things like that. Like what do you guys do as far as activities or things you guys have gotten involved in for fun?
You're in a landmass that, in terms of the Republic of Ireland, only has 4.9 million people. Okay, and it's a landmass. Just call it the average stateside size in the United States. So density of population, even downtown Dublin. I mean, you don't even need to use the word density. So what I love about this place is everything is accessible. So we walk so much more because the pub, which is the restaurant, which is the third place, as they say, that's just down the road. The butcher, the baker, and yes, the candlestick maker, they're down the road. So I think just getting out in more of a small town community type feel that I think so many people in the U.S. look for, like that's this entire country. And so I would say the community side of things is the fun. The other piece is I've learned to take myself not nearly as seriously, because here they love to take the piss, they love the crack. And that's CRAIC for our keen listeners. And keen means attentive. So there we go. And so from that perspective, I've learned to not take myself so seriously. And I don't look for feedback around how good I'm doing nearly as much. I felt in the States, we're constantly looking for reinforcement. Are you doing a great job? Here, you know what? They just get on with it.
Right,
and I love that. So I've taken less seriousness and just get on with your job and enjoy your family. And I'm going to take a lot a lot of that back with me.
That's awesome.
That's awesome.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Fun fact. What would a lot of people not know about Nick Winkleman?
Easy. You can see it Saturday,
Here we
5
go.
p.m. Irish,
Here we
2
go.
p.m. Eastern. Nick Winkleman, a.k.a. DJ Mover, Latin for Movement.
Yes.
I've been DJing for years. And many of my UK colleagues are like, man, you are spinning house tracks. I've never met a bearded American strength coach that doesn't listen to 80s rock, heavy metal, or hip hop. You're spinning freaking Allures of Dance 1982. And I'm like, absolutely. And as much time as I spend on cueing and craftsmanship of coaching, I live for music and DJing.
That's
Instagram
awesome.
Live.
All
2
right.
p.m. Eastern. Let's
know,
go Saturday.
Actually, we're thinking that we may hit you up for some theme music for the podcast. So don't be afraid if I hit you up for.
You just have to handle the copyright.
That's right. 10 or 20-second track, and you get all the props, brother.
There you go.
There it is. There it is.
That's awesome. Let's do a favorite. Give us a couple of your favorites as far as coaching moments or coaching athletes. You can take that either way.
You know, I've been sharing. I dug this one out of the locker. Someone asked me a question and it just sprang to mind. I'd forgotten it. But I think this coaching moment is one that I've only come to appreciate later on in life. And that is, I was a personal trainer. Again, I didn't know. Well, I thought I knew everything about training, but come to find out I knew nothing about training. But you couldn't have told the 20-year-old Nick that at the time. So I had read Athletic Body and Balance. So I was.
So you were way ahead of everybody else.
Yeah. That and Tudor Bompa, I'm set. I don't need another book. And so I'm sitting down, going through the pre-programming interview. So getting to know this client, understand their wants, their needs, their goals, all that good stuff. And I say, "What's your goal?" And he says to me, he doesn't give a straight answer. He's like, "Well, I'm separated from my wife, and my son, my 5-year-old son, he lives with her, and he has this poster of Superman on the wall, and he absolutely loves and looks up to Superman." He's like, "To be honest with you, I just want to be a good father, and I want to be his Superman, and so I'm here just to keep my body right, my mind right, so I can be that for him."
Wow.
And I was probably too young at the time. Now that I'm a father, like I even get choked up thinking about that because I could put myself in his position. I look at my son and my daughter in the eyes and I see what they look up to. And I know exactly what he is going through. I don't remember his name. I don't know who he is, but I just want to put the vibes that I get you, man. And so I think it was later that week, we would run these 3 sessions, these 3 to 6 session packages, just to typically get people going on a program, and then they could run it themselves. This was at a college. And so we're on the gym floor, and we're doing an RDL, a single leg RDL. And he's, back is rounded, can't control himself, Bambi on ice type stuff. And just for whatever reason, his thing about Superman being on the poster in his kid's room jumped out at me. And I'm a big Superman fan as it is. So I said, listen, you know that scene where Clark Kent just kind of flies off the building straight in the air, straight as an arrow to catch Lois Lane? Oh, yeah. I said, I need you to be Superman right now. I need you to get long from head to heel like you're jumping off that building. That's what you need to do. And so, again, I had not studied cueing or analogies, but there you go. There's an analogy. It's a perfect explanation of how best to use analogies. Take a story from someone they're familiar with and apply it to a relevant movement context. And so this guy gets in the movement, and he starts performing, locks in, a light bulb moment, as we've been talking about. And he comes up with tears in his eyes. And he says, thank you. And why is that important? Well, gosh, I used to say I coach movement. And now I say I coach through movement. And what that means is I try to use my cues as much to connect with the person as I do with the movement. And better yet, can I use a cue to connect the person to the movement? And if I can connect the person to the movement using phrases, words, and ideas that also resonate to that person's higher purpose, things that they enjoy in life, things that they're motivated to do and experience and accomplish in life, which very much so in that case is what I did. You almost might call that the perfect cue. Oh yeah. It was this guy's why. It was his sole purpose. But then it was mapped into a cue that made him better at the movement that maps to his sole purpose. It brought it into one singular moment that a single leg RDL brought a man to tears. Okay, brought a person to tears.
That's incredible.
And that for me is a great coaching moment because I believe that's why the language of coaching is so critical. It is the way we connect and move others, literally, and figuratively.
I think what's probably even maybe more impactful with that is anyone that's listening probably would have assumed that you would have, shared a pro or something like that,
or
a high
NFL
level
combine story
NFL
or something like that,
story, something with all the impacts and all the people that you've been, fortunate to coach and be around, and that's the story that you share gives such a better perspective on, what us as coaches like is meaningful, and a lot of times it isn't always the glitz and glamour stuff, right? Like it's those types of things. So that's an awesome story.
Yeah, that's outstanding, Nick. Thank you so much for sharing that with us, and thank you for being on the podcast. And ladies and gentlemen, the book is available Amazon, The Language of Coaching. Go to thelanguageofcoaching.com to see what Nick's got cooking up there. But honestly, for any of you industry folks that are listening or watching this, it's a game changer. And we talk a lot here at Fast Performance about separators, and I can honestly say this text moving forward is going to allow people to be separators within their industry. Nick, I just want to thank you so much for your time. I know it's 4 or 5 o'clock over there on a Friday in Ireland, so I hope you are headed to the pub this afternoon for some chicken strips and chips. Or a pint or two, or whatever you may be doing, but
social distancing, JC.
That's right. You guys are still at it, even in the island.
But believe me, my fridge is stocked up. We're good to go.
With something other than Monster, right? Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's after 5 now. I go for a different beverage after 5.
That's what I was assuming. Yeah. Well, thank you so much for being on the show. We really appreciate it. We understand you're going to be coming stateside this summer. Is that correct? If that still happens,
it's just dependent on how the scenario goes.
Yeah.
If so. Yeah. I'm going to be doing NSCA National, most of the Perform Betters. Yeah, I'll be there.
Good.
Awesome. Hopefully.
Well, hopefully we can get you to roll through Denver and pay us a visit, but thank you very much for your time, and we appreciate you being on the show.
Thank you, guys. Keep rocking it. Thanks for giving this a platform.
You got it.
Thanks for tuning in to today's Fast Performance Podcast with our guest, Nick Winkleman. We hope that you enjoyed today's session, and for all of our listeners, we're offering a special discount code to Nick's new book, The Language of Coaching, by going to humankinetics.com and entering Coach30 at checkout to receive a discount. Once again, that's Coach30 at checkout to receive your discount. Please subscribe to our channel. We appreciate you tuning in and hope that you have a great day.